MLB The Show 24 is officially here, and with it comes a new year of franchise mode. In this video, I will go over 7 teams that I think are best to use for franchise mode this year. So before we begin, I did just want to mention that there are a lot of good teams that you can use this year in franchise mode. This is just 7 that I'm kind of choosing from for the franchise series that I will be doing here on the channel that will be debuting sometime next week. So I'm looking at the top 100 scouts to kick us off before we get into anything, because I think it's important to look at these prospects. The prospects that are on here are going to shape the future of your franchise, and obviously it's important to have people on this list because it means you have players in your farm system who are going to be ranking up, getting better over time. Now, you may want to choose a franchise that has a lot of players on here, like the Orioles, the Nationals, the Reds, or you may want to choose a franchise that doesn't have any and grow that farm system up where you have a lot of players on this top 100 list. That's what I love about franchise mode. And in this video, we're going to be going through both sides of that. And I think an excellent place to start that conversation is with the New York Mets. Now, the Mets are in a really interesting spot here. And to me, this team They need you. They need help. Their fans are dying for somebody competent to get behind this franchise and turn them around. Now, if you're looking at the biggest question marks with the Mets this year, it is by far what is going to happen with Pete Alonso. This is the best hitter on the team, one of the best power hitters in the major leagues. You can just see the home runs over the course of the last couple seasons. But it is the last year of his contract, and after this year, he is a free agent. He's hitting that age where first basemen tend to decline. What do you do with him? Do you trade him? Do you extend him? It's a huge question mark. Now, there are some building blocks on this team, and you have to start with Francisco Lindor. He is 30 years old, but you were talking about one of, if not the best shortstop in the MLB right now. He's a switch hitter, good at pretty much everything. He's got pretty good power, 20 to 30 home runs a year. Good batting average, good on base percentage. He pretty much does it all and is good in the field as well. You're also getting Edwin Diaz back this year. He was hurt last year in spring training. He was out all of last season, but he's one of the best closers in baseball. Sub-2 ERA, 2 of the last 3 years that he was healthy. So again, you're starting to see cornerstone pieces for this Mets team is on the roster. They also have some young players who are intriguing as well, and it is Francisco Alvarez that I am the most intrigued by. A potential 22 years old, 25 home runs last year in his age 21 season. First full year with the Mets, one of the most exciting young catching prospects in the majors. And looking through this team right now, again, there are players that they have. I think Acuna is interesting as well. He kind of has a full package. You look at contacts, not bad for 22 years old, pretty good in the field. He is a shortstop prospect, but has second base as a secondary. So if you're planning on keeping Lindor, you always have that option. And then Brett Baty, he's been really disappointing for this Mets team, to be quite honest with you. Look at the batting averages. He's just not been very good. To me, this is a make or break year for if Brett Baty is going to be a part of the future of this Mets team. I think the Mets are a really interesting team for franchise this year, though. They're not your typical young team that you're going to develop, add a piece or two, and you'll be really good in 2 or 3 years. This is a team that's paying $60-some million to Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer to not play for them this season. So this is really a transition year, and I think you can take this Mets team either way. You could be more aggressive with them and trust the core of Diaz and Lindor and sign back Alonso, or you could kind of blow it up and completely restart this team, and I think both are really viable options. Now, the second team here on our list has to be the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, and there's no other place to start with this team. They lost Shohei Ohtani in free agency to the Dodgers. Mike Trout currently remains on this team, and the biggest question mark going into the season for the Angels by far is what will happen with Mike Trout. Looking at the rest of this roster, obviously it's not very good. This Angels team has not made the playoffs in the last 10 seasons with Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani on their team. So obviously this is not a good roster. They have pretty much called up all of their top prospects to the MLB earlier than just about anybody, and it's shown. And again, this starts with Mike Trout. He's still a 99 overall in the game. But to me, the question is not just the production issues or the production deficiencies that we've seen from Trout as he's gotten older. It's very clearly the health. He's played in just double-digit games 3 of the last 5 seasons. He has not shown the ability to stay healthy. And so the question for the Angels is really simple. Do you continue to build around Mike Trout, or do you trade Mike Trout for a king's ransom to a contender and start this thing from scratch? You don't have many other players really to build around, and so trading Trout does make sense because you can build this farm system back up because there's not much to it. Again, they've called up pretty much every young prospect they've had to the majors, such as Zach Neto. He's already been called up. They've used options on everyone. They kind of tried to go all in and every possible resource when they had Ohtani and Trout, and it just didn't work. They never even made the playoffs. And so you have guys who are already in the majors. Do you send them back down? How many options do they have left to go up and down? This team is in a really, really tough spot. And to me, this is one of the most interesting rebuilds you can do this year. Not only because of the Trout decision, but also because you have to build this team back up. Outside of Trout, there's not much here. Anthony Rendon doesn't really want to play baseball anymore. Brandon Drury's fine, but outside of that, you have Logan O'Hoppe, who's a decent catcher. I believe he has beat potential. Zach Neto, I still really like at the shortstop position, but outside of that, there's really not much for this Angels team to work with. But it is one of those teams that you can decide, you know what, I am going to build around Mike Trout, or no, I'm going to trade Mike Trout. And you really can go either direction, depending on how much time you want to invest in your Angels rebuild. I also should mention the pitching is horrible on the Angels. It always has been and always will be as long as Mike Trout is there. Okay, moving on to another team in the AL West, the Las Vegas Athletics, Oakland Athletics, whatever you want to call them, whatever you want to do with them. That is one of the most exciting parts about this team is that you can get into Stadium Creator, download a stadium, rebrand them up a little bit, and move them to Vegas. You can keep them in Oakland, but they're a completely blank slate. Now, you don't have much budget, if really any, to work with, but that's what makes it so challenging and so difficult. You have to build this team up through the draft. You cannot rely on free agency. You have to find every advantage you can in every nick and corner possible. You got to scrape for pennies in the couch cushions just to get any advantage you can with this Athletics team because you are working on such a tight budget. One draft could really make or break your rebuild and set you back a couple years or push you forward a year or two. And that's what makes it so fun to me, though. As you can see with the MLB lineup, this team is terrible. They're not ready to compete. They will be one of the worst teams in the major leagues in the 2024 season. But with that comes high draft picks. You can move them to Vegas, get some excitement back for the team, and then kind of work it from there. So if you are looking for a more long-term rebuild, if you're going to keep it realistic with a pretty much completely blank slate, the Oakland/Vegas Athletics are for you. Now, the next team on this list is one of the more exciting young teams in the major leagues, and that is the Washington Nationals. They've done a pretty good job of rebuilding this team up after their World Series win. That initially started with trading Juan Soto, tearing down that core that they had that included Bryce Harper and Max Scherzer and losing all those guys. And they've completely rebuilt it, and it's a really young, fun team. I think one of the most interesting parts of this Nats team, honestly, is this core. Like, who are you gonna put up to the majors maybe a little more quickly, or do you wait and let them develop in the minors, more of a long-term rebuild? Who ends up being core pieces of this Nats team for the future is really interesting because they have a ton of prospects. CJ Abrams is a guy who was a part of that Juan Soto trade to the Padres. I don't know if he's necessarily been disappointing or not so far, but he's an extremely versatile player. And of course, you have the number 2 overall pick in last year's draft, and Dylan Cruz. He's going to be a key focal point of a Nats rebuild. He is pretty much untouchable, I would say, as untouchable as it gets. He's going to be fantastic and be able to man that outfield for you for a long time. Also, Mackenzie Gore, he could be a number 1, number 2 pitcher. 4.42 ERA last year. He was also brought over from the Padres. I honestly really like Mackenzie Gore, and if I did choose the Nats for a franchise, I would really invest in him and try and build him up. But they have so many prospects. I mean, just look at some of these guys like James Wood. He looks really interesting. Pretty good contact, great fielding, great speed for his age. Brady House, kind of the same way. Pretty good across the board, but good fielding. He's a third base and shortstop prospect. But if you look at this roster for this year, it's actually not bad. I think the Nats kind of overachieved a little bit last season. And so you're going to have a team in the majors that I think honestly would be pretty fun to play with. Guys like CJ Abrams, you have Joey Gallo to hit bombs with. Joey Meneses is fun as well. And so you really do have a couple of guys that you can really hit with in the majors while you're waiting for some of those prospects to develop in the minors as well. And if you look at the pitching for the Nats, it's bad. It's just bad. Their bullpen is atrocious. Their starters are not good. But again, this is still a team that needs an overhaul. Next up on the list, we have the Boston Red Sox. I thought that this was an interesting team. Again, I'm not trying to just highlight teams that are younger teams that you could just take over and they have prospects and then they develop and then you become really good. This team is a challenge to me, to be quite honest with you, because they're kind of stuck in no man's land. They have finished last in the AL East 2 years in a row. It very well could be number 3 this year. That's the first time that's happened since 1930. But I think that the Red Sox honestly need the reality check of they're not very good. They're an older team, and a lot of their core players are old. As you can see here, we're going through it. So many of these guys are over 30. They do have 1 or 2 younger players. Kyle Teel is an interesting player, but if you pick the Red Sox and you decide to really blow them up, you do have an MVP caliber player in Rafael Devers to really kickstart your rebuild and build around, and that's pretty rare, right? Are we looking at some of these teams? Obviously, Mike Trout, but he's older with injury history. Rafael Devers is 27 years old. He's just about to hit his prime. He's extremely durable. He plays third base, which is a valuable position. He can move over to first as well. He is just really valuable to a team, to be honest, and having a guy like that for a rebuild is huge. And then looking at Kyle Teel here, again, he's interesting. Pretty good fielding already. Have to get the hitting up a bit, but he can do a lot of different things for you. Now, Tristan Casas, he's interesting because 24 home runs last year, so there is some power there to work with at just 24 years old with a potential. And Jarren Duran is a guy who was really good for the Red Sox last year. I don't know if necessarily the game, well, I guess they did do him justice for the most part, but B potential guy, 27 years old. He's just an interesting player. The Red Sox have a lot of interesting players, and I think that if you play this, you're going to probably be a 500-ish team, maybe a little worse. But is that all you want to be? You can trade some of these guys who are more veterans to contenders, grab some more young prospects back, and then rebuild that way. Or you can go for, hey, we're going to really go for it this year. Why not? We're going to try and cash in and see what we can get. I think that both options are realistic, and it's kind of up to you. It's as far as where you see this Red Sox team. And the Red Sox are going to be able to hit. Their problem comes in the pitching department. Their pitching is really bad, and particularly their bullpen is really bad. They're hoping that Kenley Jansen can solve that, but to be honest with you, I see Kenley Jansen as more of a trade chip for this Red Sox team. Now, the Red Sox, like the Mets, you are working with a higher budget, and so you have the ability to sign free agents if you're not looking to nickel and dime like you would be if you were the Athletics or another team we're going to talk about here in a moment. So you have a higher budget to work with. And that may just suit you a bit more. You may not be one of those people who want to play with small market teams. You might want to rebuild a more large or mid-tier market team because you want to have some money to play with in free agency. 2 teams left on our list. The next one is the Cincinnati Reds. And with the Reds, I think they are going to be a popular team this year. I haven't seen them mentioned too much early on certain forums like Operation Sports and those where people talk about their franchise teams, but this is definitely going to be, I think, one of the more commonly used franchise teams this year, and it all starts really with one player. Now, they do have a pretty good young core overall, to be honest with you, but they're a small market team that has one of the most exciting players in baseball, in Elly De La Cruz. He's just 22 years old. He burst onto the scene last year, switch hitter, super fast, stole 35 bases last year in limited action. Clearly a blue chip guy that you can really build around and has some versatility in the infield. But again, this Reds team is not just all Elly De La Cruz. You're also working with Hunter Green, who is a really interesting pitching prospect. He has struggled a little bit with ERAs, but to be honest with you, I really like his stats. 98 break, 95 velo. He has to just work on the control and giving up home runs, but he can certainly get there with some development. But again, this Reds team, it's not all about even just them two. They have a ton of young, really fun prospects. A lot of them are already in the major leagues and ready to go right now. This Reds team to me is honestly more of a short-term rebuild. I think that even though they are small market and you may not have the budget to sign a bunch of free agents, I think that through trades and through free agency, you could build this Reds team up pretty quickly. I think the only thing that really would hold you back, to be honest, is the small budget. Again, a lot of the young players that this Reds team has are up and in the MLB and ready to play. You can see their lineup is pretty solid overall. It's not great, but it's solid. But again, this is one of those teams that you may want to wait another year or two before you really try anything to really let these young players develop. That's completely up to you. You can also really go more all in because, like I said, they have a lot of players that you can trade and acquire some big time guys and really go for it. Again, the pitching isn't really bad either, and the bullpen is pretty solid as well. Nick Lodolo struggled a little bit last year, but was good in 2022, hoping to get him back to his 2022 ways. You also have Andrew Abbott, who was solid as well. Couple lefties, couple righties. The bullpen could use a little bit of work, but you have a setup man, you have a closer. Alexis Diaz has been a really reliable closer for the Reds overall, as you see his stats and his numbers. He's been up 2 times, 3.07 ERA, 1.84 ERA. Very solid team. And our last team on the list here is the Pittsburgh Pirates, another team that I think is going to be really popular this year, and it really is because of one player, the #1 overall pick, which we will get to. But to me, the Pirates do have a little bit more than that. First of all, you starting with arguably the best closer in baseball that's currently healthy. So that's great. You already have a bullpen guy, a blue chipper back there that you can rely on, probably the most consistent reliever in baseball right now. You also have O'Neal Cruz, who missed pretty much all of last year, but he has really shown a lot of promise. 6'7", 25 years old, shortstop, can also play third. And he is so much fun to use in this game. He is a blue chip guy that you can really start a rebuild around. But it all starts with Paul Skeens. #1 overall pick last year. A guy that he is just nasty. At the end of the day, he's nasty. Good pitching mix with a cutter, changeup, slider, and four-seamer. That velo can be developed. It will be developed, I'm sure, to a 99. He throws fast. He throws hard. They gave him pretty good stats to start overall. He's a 72 overall, just 21 years old. He's going to be really good. You have your ace of the future right here on your team. You also have some other interesting prospects as well. I think Termar Johnson is pretty interesting. Just solid across the board. Pretty good fielding, good contact. You can kind of build him up how you see fit. And Jared Jones was interesting to me as well with his 94 velo. Only a 3-pitch mix. Hopefully you can get him a 4th pitch, but Paul Skeens is a guy that you're going to be building this thing around. Taking a look at the rest of this Pirates farm system down below and some of the beat potentials that they have, it's a lot. And so again, you can kind of make that choice. With beat potential, depending on how many a team has, again, I like how it gives you that choice of, okay, do we want to trade some of these beat potential guys and go get an MLB guy and see what we can do right now? Maybe at the trade deadline, see where you're at. I think this Pirates team has potential to maybe hover around 500 at the trade deadline, maybe a little worse, but again, you can kind of make that decision. This Pirates team, similar to the Reds, in my opinion, are a move or two away from being pretty good, maybe a wild card team, or a move or two away from let's tear this down a little bit more and then really build it back up with guys like Paul Skeens, Termar Johnson, so on and so forth, maybe 2 or 3 years down the road. That's what I like about all these teams that I have in this video. I think there's a good variety. Again, it's very easy to take the Royals, the Rockies, some of the worst teams in the majors and just build them up. Well, it's not easy to do, but it's easy to say those are the teams that you should do. What I really like when I pick out my franchise teams are, what's a team that is maybe not one of the worst teams in the MLB, but they're in a pretty bad spot for other reasons. Maybe they have an aging superstar like Mike Trout that they might have to move on from. Maybe they are in financial turmoil like the Mets. Maybe they've just sucked for a long time and it's time to get them out of it. There's so many different ways you can take franchise mode, and all of these teams are in, to me, different spots. The Nats are in a different spot than the Angels, right? And the Angels are in a different spot than the Mets, and the Mets are in a different spot than the A's. So this video was made to kind of give you some variety and not just give you the worst teams in the MLB. Hopefully I was able to do that for you all, as I did decide to go through every team here because I don't want anyone to feel like their team was left off the list for whatever reason. There's other good choices in here. I think the Giants are a really interesting choice this year. I think the Marlins are interesting. Obviously, some of the worst teams you can choose, like the Rockies, the Royals, the Tigers, the White Sox, who just traded Dylan Cease. There's so many teams. I could do a video for 15 or 16 teams this year, but we are going to be doing a franchise here on my channel. It is a very sim franchise that will involve you guys in the comment section, leaving feedback on moves we should make, things like that. It's going to be very fun, but it's going to be very sim, and we're going to be letting the players in the game really tell the story for us. I'm not one to have a franchise where every year we win the World Series in year 2 or year 3. It's going to be very sim. We're going to let the attributes speak for themselves. We're going to build the team up as they would in real life, based on the budget, based on where we're at. And what team that is, I have not decided yet, but there will be an announcement video coming from me sometime next week, announcing the team and then going into a deep dive on that team right before we get to opening day. So thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comment section below if one of these teams was your favorite. Did I miss anything? Again, I'm an Orioles fan, so none of these teams are my favorite personally, but I try to do a lot of research on them and get a good idea of where they're at in their team building process. Also, let me know, what team are you thinking about doing this year for your franchise if you're a sim franchise player? And then keep an eye out next week for that announcement video about our franchise team here on the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. Appreciate all the support as always, and I will see you all for the announcement video next week.